reporting for the California Combat Association. Today we have some team members of the California Sacramento chapter of the Armored Combat League, as well as some other fans of the sport. So, Nick, you're a member of the Sacramento Siege, right?
Yep, I'm Nick. I'm a member of the Sacramento Siege and quite recently a USA Knight with the Armored Combat League.
And I've recently started practicing with Nick, hope to be a competitor and a fighter soon. And we also have here Alex.
I'm an aficionado of the sport and joining for some commentary today.
Great. So we're going to be talking about some of what you need to know in order to watch and enjoy ACL fights. We're going to be talking about the different roles that you see on a field, how a team breaks down, the different types of fight formats that we have, and how fighters go about bringing down the enemy team and getting the win. So we got three basic positions in ACL. We got our flankers, our guards, and our centers. And the flankers are going to be nimbly-bimbly, moving around the field, trying to disrupt, looking for an advantage wherever they can find it. Your centers are your tanks, going to line up usually on the edges of the list and going to try to establish a hold of position. And your guards are your beaters, your main DPS, your damage dealers. What role do you usually fill?
So I'm usually in the role of a guard, but I'm a lighter guard. I hold a very special place as a flanker guard, really depending on what the team size is.
Mm-hmm.
For California, we're all much smaller guys, so most of the time, me being 6 foot and 210 pounds, I am the big guy for my team for no reason, and I hold the guard position from there. So my job is to engage, deal damage, tie up as many guys as I can for the fight, so the flankers can run in, take them out from the sides while they're distracted. And then we don't really have centers here except for one guy down south. Lance Hoffman is the center for California. You actually see the different positions having a very, very special place inside of the team dynamic, as well as the dynamic changing depending on what type of fighters you're bringing to the table. We had that fight with Ukraine and Poland, and we saw two very different dynamics of team setup, one of them being entirely guards. So everybody's out there to deal damage and to put the hurt on and beat the guy in front of them. And then we had all flankers on the Ukrainian side, which their job was not to beat the guy in front of them, but to beat the guy fighting their friend.
Yep, they do it very effectively.
Yeah.
They did it very effectively, and they won.
But this is very different from a traditional team model in fives where there's usually one center and at least one flanker and then a bunch of guards.
We usually see that setup in America, France, Germany, pretty much everywhere else. Canada had a slightly different one where they had two flankers instead of three guards. And then they had two guards, one center. Their fights against Japan were super interesting. They actually had so much attrition from fighters getting either their equipment knocked apart or themselves knocked apart, where their final match was a 4-on-4 fight that quickly devolved into people losing armor, and then the only two guys that didn't seem to have their kits falling apart battling it out, which I don't know if you saw the samurai, but my God, that samurai was amazing.
Yeah, he's getting it done this year?
No, but he looked good. It's important to note that looking good is half the battle, no matter what your position.
Is it?
Is that the other half from knowing?
Yeah, it's the soft score. They're going to judge the armor later, right?
Well, yeah, you definitely get judged later by how good you look, and then you get judged by how much you won. So there's only two parts of the battle: looking good and winning.
Right.
As long as you do half of the battle, you're okay.
And then of course knowledge being a large component. I mean, it could be half.
Well,
it could be as much as half the battle.
There's 150% of a battle. Yeah,
right.
So really, we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an intense sport that we go over 100% battle.
Yeah, really,
in a standard battle.
Really, golf is about a 50% sport.
Right.
Where you only have to do one of those three things. War is usually a two, like 100% type of battle sport, and then this takes it to the next level where you have 150%.
Yeah, right. Well, war is going to share knowing being half the battle. You got 50% of a battle there, but then they also bring in the 50% lasers.
Yeah,
for war, so.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, honestly, I don't think that winning is 50% of war. You don't really. Nobody wins, so it's not important.
Yeah, well, your arms manufacturers are going to win. Your peasantry, who are going to be like bombed into oblivion and starved to death. They're winners in some respects.
The beta male that didn't go to war that
Sure.
sleeps with your wife is going
Oh
to
yeah,
win.
he's a winner.
Yeah, he's definitely out of everybody in the war.
He's the biggest.
I mean,
winner.
both
He's the
in
biggest
war
winner.
and in life.
You didn't know either that he actually owns the shop that makes your guns. So it's like not only is he giving you a gun to go fight at war, but he's
Wait,
f***ing your
man.
wife.
Yeah.
Super lucky guy.
So, back onto like team composition. Poland and Ukraine were very successful running non-conventional teams. Are there any upsides you see to breaking the standard formula?
Well, there's always an upside. I mean, there's this idea of a meta inside of the game. The meta being that three guards, one center, one flanker. By disrupting that meta, you don't know as an opponent what what the enemy is going to do, and you as your own team have a very special insight to how the fight is going to happen.
Yeah, and we see that come out several times, even in the layout and setup of the team, round over round. Oftentimes, the teams will change their formation, or sometimes, especially in the Striking Eagles, we saw this a few times, they'll all stack up in the middle together, giving no clear idea of where everyone's going to end up. And they could go into echelon, they could go into a traditional taking both sides of the list formation, or they could just blitz.
And actually, that is discussed, but not really expounded on inside of America and its own formations, is we have that stack that we do in the beginning, 3 in the front, 2 in the back. And it's great because in the initial planning phase against an opponent, you're looking at their size or the opponent's lineup, and you're like, well, the big guys are on this side of the field, so let's go attack the small guys on the other side. Which the general rule that we have in American skill fighting, is strength against weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Never attack the opponent where they're strong, always attack them where they're weak. Never attack strength on strength, weakness on weakness. Find the advantage and take it. Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit more about the U.S.'s comps and strategies, formations at some larger melee scales too. So we talked about like typical Striking Eagle team comp, and on the 10s and 16s, like first of all, how many centers, guards, and flankers we're usually looking at.
So the team comp is broken up into 3 different sections.
Yeah.
Your right flank, your center, and your left flank.
Right.
You're looking at 1 center per wing. You'll have maybe a flanker, and then guards fill out the rest of your ranks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly how the 16s were doing it.
And you're saying in the 16s they maybe had a couple too many centers. That could be the case. They were definitely stacking the Striking Eagles on the center.
They had all of the Striking Eagles inside of the center pretty much.
Yeah.
One thing to note about the American formation though was how not aggressive they are. Even in the 5-man fight,
they're really slow to engage.
Even in the 5-man fight, when they would go to they do the standard split of 3 on one side of the list, 2 on the other side of the list. They didn't really react. They waited for the enemy to come into them. And you would see Ukraine, especially in the 16 fights, they started at the halfway point on the field.
Ukraine was able to really take advantage of that.
They actually had to, one of the fighters, Andrew Dion, told the marshals, hey, get those Ukrainians back to their side of the field.
Yeah.
Because
you know
ridiculous.
how Ukrainians respect borders. So.
Well, I mean, they learned it from their dad, right?
Yeah. So we talked about the comp a little bit in the American team. We've got these 3 different wings, and then the traditional American formation in the 10s and the 16s is the echelon.
Yep.
Right. So it takes a couple of different forms, but we've got
It's a crescent formation that's used to draw the enemy into the center, creating a natural flanking position where the Americans suddenly envelop the attacking formation.
This is roughly V-shaped.
Yep.
Formation with the enemy team able to come into that V. It's not pointed towards them.
Yep.
So that works out with a center on each of the wings, anchoring their wing on the list, and everyone lined up in echelon or in a diagonal backwards line towards the American center. It's really tough to engage with anyone except that one center man on each flank, because as you come in, you face more and more guards, and you're at a numerical disadvantage. However, that guy does take a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
Yep. To be fair, in the 16s, where you have more guys actually filling up the list, blocking up space, it works out really well. And being that it's a reactive formation, you want your larger guys. So it's not necessarily a formation made for flankers because they don't have a role. It's except
the
for
Americans have
catching.
a really hard time sending out flankers from that.
Yeah,
In fact, it's almost always a disadvantage of them to do so.
it is.
And
Their
they-
flankers are primarily used to stop incoming flankers
Right.
who get
It's all
past their
responsive.
position.
Yeah. The strategy, once they've got people engaging the way they want to, is to send either the center or an unengaged wing to assist the other wing,
Yes.
hopefully initiating the steamroll, taking a few people down and continuing that momentum.
It can get really difficult in
Yeah.
those reactive formations if the enemy aggresses and they aggress on all sides. You can
Right.
hold off one entire wing of, which I believe is 5 people, and the center has 6 for the 16s. You can send 3 people into 5 people, and those 5 won't actually disengage or be able to really
Right.
maneuver against the
Yeah.
other incoming force, despite their one flank suddenly being completely enveloped by enemy fighters.
Yeah, that's a big disadvantage. And another challenge with the American formation is that it requires a lot of discipline, a lot of patience, and
Yes.
really good command structure. And that's very difficult on the field.
Yes.
Right.
Uh,
It's very hard to make yourself heard.
And well, I mean, it's not necessarily very crowd pleasing to sit there and just wait for the enemy.
I'm not in your shot. 'Cause I can hear every.
Sure.
So not only do you have that patience that you're testing, but you're testing the crowd patience, and not having someone cheer for you can definitely fight harder when you have somebody cheering for you.
That's true. That's worth considering.
Yeah, it's and you get more motivated when you do that charge. There is something to
Yep.
be said about
Yep.
bringing the fight to the enemy that makes it feel like you are winning.
Yeah. And oftentimes against the 16s, the Europeans will do that. They form up in a big block and they all charge. And it really gets the crowd going and seems to get the fighters' blood up. But just as often as it works, the American echelon does come into play as planned, able to surround, flank them, and start the steamroller.
You could see in the fight between America and the Polish, Poland has a lot of experience fighting this American echelon.
Mm-hmm.
What they do is they just attack the points on the edges of the list.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, because that seems like the weakness is if you have your centers grounding your wings. If the opposing team sort of anchors on the center, starts the fights on the list, and then you're just very much trading one for one.
Oh, they can trade better than 1 for 1, because imagine they have a polearm guy, right?
Right.
Guarded by a sword and board. He can just hit that center indefinitely if the Americans don't change anything, and that guy's going down sooner or later.
Right, yeah. So you get all the action on the wings, and you're getting no forward momentum from the echelon, and the center can't break to come in. So that seems like a potential weakness to it.
Yeah.
So how could you deal with that? Like, would it be possible to switch centers out or to alter the formation on that wing to deal with that?
So ideally what you would have is you'd have someone with a longer range weapon that could come to support the center. So a guard coming to support the center and take the heat off of him, or even changing out with the center to take that heat.
Yeah, maybe that could be the last man on the line, so he comes around the back.
Yeah.
And, moves up to the front to support.
Usually that guy you have who's sitting in the back, who's not actually in the line for the echelon, who's sort of overwatching and making sure everything's going well, is the flanker who's meant to catch the other flankers when they get through.
Well, that's true. It'll open you up to flankers.
Yes. So what moving that guy off of that position to that or other role does kind of diminish his ability as a flanker, as well as you just traded out, your rook for a pawn.
Yep, that's true. What are some other variations
Or
you
not
could
really a
possibly
pawn.
see on the American echelon, maybe to make it more aggressive?
So the way to make it more aggressive is to not do it. What you have is an opportunity where everyone expects. This is what we tried to do for the 10-man team. We actually had lots of strategies that involved making the echelon formation because everybody expected us to do it, and then instead charging and charging from different points from the echelon. One was one flank charges into the enemy, and their objective is to get to the enemy's side of the list and get to the back corner of it. What that does is it turns an entire half of the enemy's heads to look at that suddenly lost flank where there's Americans where they shouldn't be. And the center drives in to flank that half of the enemy army when their heads are turned, and the other flank will ride up and basically shield or watch over the charge of the center.
Yeah, that's great. I was just going to bring that up. I would love to see the formation change that way. So you have one flank that is relatively unengaged, push aggressively and charge all the way through, and the center moves up just to support that flank. Yeah, there are some cases where I don't know if it was pre-planned, but it seems like the American teams did pull that off in previous IMCFs. And that can be really, really effective when they start rolling up the enemy's flank that way.
Yeah. It definitely would have been much more effective. There was a lack of experience and understanding on the American 10v10s. And after our botched matches against the English, which we should have taken a little bit more lightly and understood that the English team is a very good team, like winning against them would have been hard-pressed. But after that, our leadership decided that we should retain our echelon formation, which didn't work because none of us are big guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you don't have the essential anchors that can just stand at the edges forever.
Yeah, right. So my description of myself was that I am a flanker guard, lighter end guard, and I was the biggest guy on the team. So,
yeah,
so
and height and weight are just a huge advantage.
It's
not everything, but it really matters.
It really matters, especially for when you're trying to run a formation like that with like pivot points and junk.
So planning it again, do you think you would have opted for a strategy more like the Ukrainian team, which was much more fast and nimble?
I would have opted for a strategy much like what the Polish were doing.
Okay.
In their 16-man fights and in their 10-man fights, which was they would stack with two lines, and the lines are staggered. And as an opponent, it looks like it's something that's easy to get through. What it actually does is that you're exposing yourself first to a 2-on-1, and then a 1-on-1 and then another 2-on-1 where you don't actually have sight of your second opponent. So you know you're charging through a gap between two people into one person, and you're trying to veer off left or right to get around them, to get into their backfield. And but what ended up happening is that you then put yourself between two more people, and those two guys have a pretty good shot of taking you out. And it's really good for catching incoming fighters, like what we experienced from Ukraine and
that would have been
Austria.
interesting. It's a relatively receptive defensive formation that doesn't require the same physicality and perhaps even a bit less team coordination and on-field command.
It's as easy as charge as well, because you have your first wave and then your second wave of impact. It could be even putting it into 3 stacks, because what we've noticed is that when you stack up units like the US's 5-man team going in that 3-2 formation, it's a lot harder for an enemy to actually maneuver against those stacked formations, and it's a lot easier for you as a team to know where your position is, know where your teams are, and to spread yourselves across the field accurately.
Yeah, well, that's starting to sound a bit like Roman maniple formation. If you know a bit of that history, they were fantastically successful with something called the maniple formation, which we don't know much about in terms of how it actually worked, except that maniple means hand or fist, and you would have it's basically a platoon-sized formation, and split into 2 groups, 2 maniples, 2 hands, and they're referred to as the front and the back maniple. And we know that they would one maniple would engage at some point later in the fight, the other maniple would either join or would engage in their place. Other than that, it's up for debate exactly how it happened, but I've always been curious to see that played out in ACL with like 2 large waves engaging or disengaging in coordination.
Oh, it's definitely sounds like a really great plan. There's nothing like getting that second win when you're in the fight and then bringing it back to the enemy.
Yeah,
disengaging is really hard, but if you have a formation that's actually there to catch your retreat, could be worth it.
So what's the threat to disengaging? Like, what makes it a technically difficult maneuver?
So anytime in armor, and the objective being if you fall down, you're out, tripping is always a hazard. I hate to say it, there was quite a few of our own American fighters who fell prey to the hazards of having feet and having tiny sticks that you have to walk on and having a whole bunch more weights. You're putting basically a third of your weight on the upper half of your body. It makes
we
you
see that
very
all
top heavy.
all the time.
And
Tripping, stumbling,
when you're backing up,
and then
you have to be very precise because someone could shove you, and then suddenly too much of your top weight is too far back and you fall over, or you turn around to try to actually go away. They have your back all of a sudden. It's very easy to take somebody that's not looking at you down. Disengaging in general is a taxing experience. You have to, usually what you do is you try and reset the fight. If they grab you, you're in a grappling match and you can't retreat. And what we see from a lot of fighters, especially in the 16s, they'll grab you, pull you to their side of the fight. Suddenly you have nobody to help you out, and there's 6 people beating you in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Not a very fun experience for the guys that happen to. Sorry, France.
Right. So that's the hazards of disengaging, and it's, technical proficiency and teamwork that makes it actually possible to do that reliably.
Yes. You'll see the Ukrainians are very good at disengaging. Part of that being that they're small. Grabbing them was pretty difficult, and they can lower their center of gravity and escape out.
Mm-hmm.
As a taller person, lowering your center of gravity to escape a grappling fighter that's shorter than you is next to impossible. You have to put a lot of your weight forward, and that opens you up for a really easy takedown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they just have to knock a leg out or stumble you or hip throw you or anything.
Or just if you bend forward and you're backing up, all they have to do is grab your head and back up too, stretching out that distance that your top heavy half has to keep yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Another element with disengaging that we've seen is that a lot of the lighter fighters, the flankers and the smaller guards, seem to be very canny in how they engage, and they leave themselves, even if they're going 2-on-1 with an ally, they leave themselves an opportunity to disengage if it looks like they're not going to be able to do something fruitful. The Ukrainians do that. We saw Ringo on the French team in the fives.
Oh,
do that very
Ringo
frequently,
is
move to wherever he needs to be.
Ringo's the 5-man for America. I forgot what you're talking about, the French fighter with the wooden buckler and the curved sword.
Yeah, guy was all over the place, and leaving himself the space he needed and not getting locked up if he could avoid it.
It's very important that you don't get locked up into those scenarios.
Especially as the flanker, because that's not your role.
Yeah,
You
grappling.
can't fulfill your role. Can't help your team.
As a
stuck in.
flanker, never grapple is definitely one of the biggest rules of flanking.
So as a flanker guard, how do you approach that? Because you've got to get in to deal some damage, but you can't get too stuck in.
So what I try to do is I check a lot. So I'm bigger than a lot of the flanker guys. I can throw my weight around pretty well. So rather than strikes, my initial contact is holding my axe in my hands,
just a hockey check.
both hands overhand, and hockey check people, running around hockey check. If I get in close to somebody and I have to disengage, because a lot of the times when you do that check, the person to try to stay up will wrap their arms around you and try to hug you to keep themselves up, using you as their pivot. That gives you an awesome opportunity to then kayak roll your weapon into them to create
Put 'em off
distance.
balance
Put them off balance, get them off of the hug. And then as soon as you got them off of there, you have the opportunity then to start dealing the damage as your guard position requires, or your flanker instincts kick in and you go and
disengage.
find a better fight.
Yeah.